Fernette began her career as a neurologist and scientist, and it was only when her children had learning challenges that she and her husband, Dr. Brock Eide, became interested in using neuroscience-informed strength-based strategies to encourage and support students and their families. Conventional ways of testing and education overlooked strengths. Dr. Fernette Eide is the co-author and co-founder of the Dyslexic Advantage, the book, the nonprofit, and now the movie, as
Yay.
well as co-founder of neurolearning.com. Anna began her career in the early 90s as a public school elementary teacher in Palo Alto, California. Always passionate about literacy, when her bright son struggled to learn how to read, she was on a mission to help him. That was the beginning of her journey to understand the strengths and challenges of a dyslexic learning profile and the science-based methods that lead to grade level reading. Anna ultimately founded Touchstone Learning in Redwood City, California, a small school designed to meet the unique needs of gifted dyslexic students, preparing them to transition to a school of their choice. With over 11 years of experience as a public school teacher, Mandy brings a deep understanding of education and student development to her current role as a learning specialist at Schwab Learning Center, which is part of the Children's Health Council. She works closely with high school students and adults, offering personalized strategies for learning and executive functioning, particularly for individuals with ADHD, dyslexia, and other learning differences. Her approach is rooted in the belief that every person has unique strengths, and Mandy is passionate about helping each learner unlock their full potential through tailored support that honors who they are and how they learn best. So, welcome. We're so excited to have you here. Audience, feel free to put questions in the chat, and we will ask them after we ask a few questions of our own. So, you are all former teachers and scientists. What struck you about this film, and what kinds of things that the experiences that this film touches on led you to do the work that you do today? Who would like to jump in?
I can do it.
Go for it.
I really resonated with those women. My son, who ends up is dyslexic, super bright kid, and yet he was not learning how to read. And I was using everything I had learned in teacher college, practically hitting him over the head with it, and it wasn't working. And I did not understand why. And when I asked the school, first, they did not want to test him because they said that there was no problem. And then when they did test him, and I said, his dad is dyslexic. I think he's dyslexic. They said, we don't like to use those labels because that really
Yeah, that's
pigeonholes the
right.
child. I mean, this was so typical. And then when we went through the data that they had gathered, they said, he's average intelligence and it's going to take him a while to figure out how to read. And I'm thinking, I've been a teacher for a long time, and this does not strike me as someone who is having trouble with, intellect. And that kind of threw me into a place of the school is not the answer. Like they don't understand what I'm seeing and they're not listening to me. And they're making it seem like, why do you want him to be dyslexic? Like they said those words to me. Like I don't, what I want is for him to be recognized. So that kind of got me started with a reading therapist. And then I saw what she was doing with him and I could see the progress. And then I'm like, you know what? I want to change the focus of my teaching because I want to help these kids.
Amazing. Fernette, would you like to go next?
It's so crazy. It's so crazy. It's really common, but there can be variations and that can mess people up in terms of thinking what part of it is it more writing? Is it more, all these kind of different things. It changes over time, but the lack of really awareness, identification, and then importantly, teachers being able to actually teach the right methods that will work for kids. It's just shocking how, what a mess it is. And even in private schools and even in, just a lot of areas where there's a lot of money invested in schools, it's like going over. And it was, I looked up because I couldn't believe there was this, don't say it's dyslexia, um, philosophy in school. And as far as I can tell, when I looked it up, it came from neuropsychologists, and they were saying, you know, don't say it's dyslexia. You can say that there's a reading achievement problem or something like that. But the problem is it disconnects from the science. And because there's also, a wealth of research about the strengths in people with dyslexia. It disconnects them from that. And if you don't specifically identify these things, you also don't get targeted intervention because, there are reading difficulties that are not dyslexia, and they often have different approaches. And so this aspect of trying to lump all these very different kids together. And as you say, in the twice exceptional situation, they often get it from both sides. They don't get the strengths recognized, they don't get the weaknesses recognized, and as a result, and they're very perceptive about themselves. They know something is not making sense. And if you don't have that, a way of telling him why certain things are hard, then, it's like, I mean, this came out in our movie, right? Someone said, I guess I must be one of the dumb kids. I mean, that's one of the most common things we hear from kids. And why this has to go on for the length that it does, because it seeps on people. It's a huge burden for kids and later adults too. So, there's a lot of points about the movie that resonated. The slowness of being and trying to get a hold of people. Oh, that sounds so awful. I mean, everyone knows about it. And yet, it was almost painful seeing the mom with all the cards, but not knowing how to do that. Not knowing how to, break things down the way she'd never been told. And
Yeah.
why has she never been told? I don't know why, because, certainly there's a lot of approaches now that even you could, I mean, there are books that even can help parents and things like that, and step by step, but there was just no one to talk to her, and to be able to give her kind of a lifeline. And yet there was a lot of money spent on education. So yeah, I think it's amazing how people come together and been able to change things.
Yeah, so inspiring what they accomplished. And by
But
the way,
it's still a mess.
still a mess,
Sometimes
but they
a
opened a
mess.
second school
I
this
mean, so I'm
fall.
really happy for those kids in the school, but it's just, I just spoke to a grandfather the other day. He said, "What is the deal with this? We're three generations now in this family, and the littlest one is getting hassled in school, and it's just, you know, being made to feel lousy, and that kind of chain reaction of, you know, they're failing, they're not getting help, and then suddenly they're getting bullied, and just that all that thing. Why put them in that psychic stress?
And Mandy, what did you want to?
Yeah. One thing that really stood out to me from that movie was the quote, I don't remember who said it, but kids excel where they find joy. And that is so true. And I would also add where they feel like they belong. And so that was a huge part of why I love teaching, and that I could create that classroom where everyone belonged. Everyone was interested in something, maybe not everything, but I was like, I know you don't like math, but let's try this anyway and see if I can convince you to like math. So I loved creating that family essentially, but there's only so much time you have for 30 kids, no matter what. You're one human, there's 30 kids. And I really valued working one-on-one with kids and giving them that extra support, and just seeing that growth. So that's why I kind of switched. I made a turn and became a learning specialist. And one other thing that I just thinking of with that movie is, like, when kids act out, that demonstrates that there's a need not being met. So I feel like it's very easy, especially for kids with dyslexia, who there's just so much in school that's procedural and hard for them. Like, it doesn't fit with their strengths necessarily. So it's just so much more likely for kids to act out and then be penalized, when really the adults needed to take a closer look and be like, okay, what is this behavior mean? Like, look for a deeper meaning.
Yes. Oh my gosh. They're getting their needs met, right? Like, I'm not learning. So what can I do to not feel dumb, not have people think that I'm dumb? I can act out, I can be the joker, I can pretend that I'm bored and not paying attention. And really what they're saying is, hey, can
Help.
somebody help me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so we touched on it a little, but why is dyslexia so misunderstood or often missed in the 2E population? And how do the traditional identification methods fall short? I know, Anna, you wanted to speak to that.
So when you have smart kids, they often are able to compensate in different ways. So it might be that they have a great background in material. So when they look at something that they're reading, they're able to pull together what it probably says. And they might even be able to make it seem like they understood what they were reading because they are smart and they know that if it's a dog, a story about a boy with a dog and the dog gets lost, like they can pretty much explain to somebody, here's what I read, even if they couldn't read the multi-syllable words, even if not only is the reading hard for them, but if they had to then write about it, they would have a tough time. And so one is the compensation that a lot of kids who are bright are able to compensate. Not all, some kids, that's not their strength. They have other strengths. And then the other thing is that the kinds of reading tests that are given are not pinpointing phonological awareness. And even when they are, if the people who are doing the screening don't have good phonological awareness themselves, then the kids are going to fall through the cracks because if you don't have it yourself, you can't tell if somebody else has it or not. And so for kids who have stealth dyslexia, they're so bright, they're really able to compensate. And then when they get to something like science in middle school or high school, and they're faced with these really long words, they don't have a hope of decoding those words because they haven't been given the tools. And it's not rocket science. Like it's scientific, it is the science of learning how to read, but not enough teachers are trained in how to do it. And that needs to change.
Yes. Does anyone else want to weigh in on why dyslexia is missed in 2E learners and anyone?
Well, what I would say is that to really identify well, because now there's all this talk about dyslexic training in schools, and it's definitely helpful, but it's not comprehensive. And it'll still miss. I mean, sometimes people just use dibbles to say whether you're in or out, and the comprehensive testing is expensive and it's time consuming, and there's also a lot of talk now, concern about, more privilege going into these students who are twice exceptional, where you should be devoting, the school's budget more to the students who are not able to read. You can read up to the normal, the average range, but to get them more severely impaired, which may or may not be dyslexia. It may be, brain injury, it might be low IQ and low reading performance. And so it's a complicated issue, but there are also social factors that won't identify twice exceptional students. But I think the students and everyone should get what they need. I mean, I think it's unfair when people or school systems try to pit one group of students against the other, in which both situations, the students aren't getting what they need. But, I think there's a particular existential angst that comes from students who have a high IQ and low performance
Yep.
because of dyslexia, because of dysgraphia. And I think those students are really important, and if, being on the other side, because I'm a physician, I mean, I know that when doctors see a kid and they seem fine. It's not a kid who's actively seizing. It doesn't look like it's that big a problem, but when you're on the parent side, it's a long time where they're not getting help, where you're starting to see them, before where they're just excited about learning and then just suddenly just like disappear. And that's the thing where you just have to intervene. And some cases, for parents of twice exceptional kids, you do the nuclear option, and you do homeschooling, or you do charter schooling or something like that if you can, even though it just might throw your career kind of like up in the air, because this is really hard to do. It's expensive, and it may not have been what you'd planned, but that's what a lot of people do because it really makes a difference. And when you start to see them disappear like that, it's kind of shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, Fernette, somebody was asking about what did you mean by they give the dibbles and then you're in or out?
Yeah, well, so like the dibbles, like it might just be a brief test, might be a minute, it might be 3 minutes or something like that. Like I think that I've ready
Yeah.
screener, a lot of those tests are only about a minute or so long. And so if a kid also throws it because it's like, I've been feeling so long,
Yeah.
this is just insulting. I'm hearing blah, 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 and it's just not going to do it,
Yeah.
well, that's one sort of problem. But another sort of problem is if you only do a few of the sounds that then suddenly it's like you're fine. And when you do comprehensive testing, you're really looking specifically at, this profile of strengths and weaknesses. And ideally, the parents and the teacher should know that's the general profile of a student, and to understand the strengths so that they can support the weaknesses and also have something that students can feel good about themselves and realize that it's a niche, then a lot of the learning gets easier because they're not so beaten down. They have something. So, so that's the issue is that some of these screening tests, it's so hard to get them in school. And then if you're not identified, then are you lost forever? Maybe you're lost forever. They say you got screened and you don't have it.
Yeah.
So there are some students who continue to struggle in school, and parents can lobby and try to get additional comprehensive testing. But it is a huge difference if you can get it, because then you can actually speak from a certain point of authority about, what their standardized strengths are. I realize not people aren't standardized, but the thing about IQ tests, there are so many upside surprises when there's really IQ testing involved. And for that reason, I really like it in the, in the whole student population because you know more about what you're dealing with and, and you can nurture that strength side.
Mhm. And Mandy, I know you see them on the older side. What do you see?
That's actually exactly what I was going to bring up because there are so many people who do fall through the cracks because of past ignorance, past like incorrect knowledge. And even now, because they can compensate and just mask so well with their strengths, there are adults in very high ranking colleges who have dyslexia and don't know. Instead, they blame themselves and they're like, well, I'm lazy at this, but I'm good at this. And it's so deeply internalized that when they are evaluated and they do get that diagnosis of dyslexia, it is just a complete like revelation to them, really. And there are people who just can use their strengths and memorize the shapes of words, like where the B sticks up and like the beginning and end, and they just memorize all the words that they know. So that's where like Anna was talking about with testing, it's really good to test nonsense words because then you can get a sense like they just have no idea because they haven't memorized that. So really, yeah, I feel so strongly that everyone deserves to have their needs met, and especially like 2E learners and gifted kids because they're fine, but really the dropout levels are pretty crazy. So especially as you get higher into like middle school and high school, and everything gets so much harder, and that's where you can really see the gaps and the lack of foundational knowledge.
Yep. And the thing I just wanted to say too is that school screenings, there are probably some good ones out there somewhere. I mean, I'm willing to say that. But a lot of times the screening is not going to be the end all be all kind of revelation for all kids who have dyslexia. And while private testing is super expensive, parents can do dyslexia screenings and they're a lot less expensive. And at least with that knowledge, a parent can move forward with some confidence. Like, I know that my child has these strengths and these deficits when it comes to decoding or comprehension or reading speed or accuracy. And for a lot of parents, that might be all they need. Like, okay, I'm not crazy. This is what's happening. I need to somehow get for my child what they need because the school is not listening to me.
And so we've touched on this, and the film showed a lot of very sad outcomes. What happens when you don't screen and support these kids early? What do you see by the time they get to you? Or
Well, for us, most kids are entering our school in fourth grade, which is it's late. We know that the developmental window for attaining adult literacy is starting to close around the age of 9. And that doesn't mean it's impossible, but it means it's improbable that kids are going to be able to read at an adult level if they haven't had some kind of remediation before then. So it's super frustrating when, teachers who mean the best, they see how smart these kids are and they're like, they just need more time. No, early intervention is what all kids need and they deserve it. And if they can be remediated by the end of first or second grade, the sky's the limit. And hopefully at that point, their self-esteem is still intact. So they're going to be able to reach whatever potential they ever could have. But as they get older, by fourth grade, these kids are oftentimes, they feel bad about themselves. They think that they're lazy. They think that they're immature. I mean, the things that the teachers like have labeled them as, because teachers can't understand why these smart kids aren't learning how to read when they're quote unquote not dyslexic. So the earlier the better. It's always best to find out as soon as you can, and to also know that dyslexia runs in families. So if you've got one child who's dyslexic, you want to find out if their younger siblings are dyslexic too, because maybe they're not presenting in the same way. Maybe you don't have the inkling yet, but parents often know. Trust your gut. Like, you can trust yourself. If you think there's a problem, then there probably is. And that doesn't mean it cannot be ameliorated with some kind of tutoring. And that's why you want to just move forward. Even if teachers are telling you it'll be fine, just give them time. You can know that that's not the best thing to do. You want to get help as quickly as possible.
Yes, because really in third grade, that's when you start, not just before it's learning to read, and then third grade, it's really reading to learn. So if you don't know how to read, then you're really far behind, and then the gaps just keep increasing. And like, imagine those fourth graders, and then imagine the adults who their entire lives have been, or I mean, high schoolers, already high school so hard. And then you get into all of these other things that you think about yourself, things that you hear teachers saying, parents saying. It's so sad.
So I want to say, because I do think I have a different early intervention, totally for that. Okay, but I say at the beginning, I do also want to say, because there are some parents out there who maybe weren't identified themselves, or they have kids who are in high school or hopefully in college or things like that. And so, and I understand the movie also wanted to talk about, they're worried about the prison pipeline, et cetera. But there are a lot of adults who never were identified. That's just the name of the game, and some people will look back and say there were all these doors that were closed to us. But because we had an eclectic community, dyslexic adults, because they came to us from the Dyslexic Advantage, I was able to interview all these dyslexic adults, and some just by pure grit, and failure to take no for an answer, were able to get their education and also able to make a lot of breakthroughs. And so some of them made it through higher education. There are sticky points in college and graduate school if you do that. Like, I interviewed one of the central scientists of Genentech, who had helped the first I don't know, so the recombinant DNA for insulin. So he developed that, Dennis Clyde. And, it was his graduate defense that was tripping him up, his writing his thesis. And he almost didn't get his PhD because he had to have, his sponsor basically appealed to him because he struggled with writing. They didn't have these kind of fancy writers anymore. So there are a lot of things like Kathy Drennan, who like Anna, you mentioned, she reads by the shape of words, but she's an MIT professor. And oh, yeah, she was told you're not college material. The thing is what these, and numerically, I'm sure they're rare, but I think it's really helpful for parents who are already late in the game and are just discovering it, because what they did is they ignored bad advice And if they had that determination, they often found their skills doing things rather than reading about it. So, I think Kathy Drennan found her skills when she actually worked in a lab. She learned very well from doing experiments, listening to people talk, having people discuss, the pros and cons of different theories and things like that. And so I do want to put that book in there too, because it's not simply, you know, if you don't have early intervention, which is what we hope every young kid gets, but it's not putting them off this path
Yeah,
to
I'm
success.
so glad that you said that, Fernette, because you're right. I mean, my own son is not remediated, and he is a very successful adult, and he did things his own way. The concern is when the personality type of different people, some people are going to be able to persevere. And I have to say that the dyslexic students that I've worked with are some of the most persevering people I've ever met in my entire life. And I think that's because they've always had to work harder. So from a young age, they kind of knew that you come up against something that you just have to overcome it. But some kids are not good at that. And so hopefully more and more of them will be screened early so that if they're the ones, like a lot of parents say, my gosh, I'm dyslexic. Like I never
Yeah.
knew. But now I realize all of these things, and yet I'm an attorney or I am a physician. And I hope my kid has it a little bit easier than I did. But yeah, absolutely, there
Yes,
are lots of
totally.
successful dyslexics who were never remediated, a lot, and many of them, I mean, Charles Schwab, Gavin Newsom, like there's a lot of very successful people. But I would say that um, because we know about them, it seems like it's maybe more common than it may actually be.
Well, I was interested with that statistic on the self-made millionaires in
Mhm.
the movie. I had never heard that statistic
Yeah.
before on the percentage. So I thought that was really interesting.
Mhm.
And just to follow up, yes, like the Schwab Learning Center is endowed by Charles Schwab, who didn't know he was dyslexic until
Yeah.
his kid was diagnosed at
Yeah.
Stanford. And he also went to Stanford. So it's so possible. Just
Yeah.
if you don't get early intervention, you can still have a great life and you still have so many
Absolutely.
strengths, to be clear. So I agree. It's just
Thank you.
it would be good to support self-esteem from a younger age.
I want to
Yes.
make sure that I love this conversation. I want to make sure that we have time to focus on the strength part of this conversation. So my next question was, why is it critical to have a strength-based view of dyslexia?
Well,
I think, I mean,
we
take
think that the
it away.
fundamental presentation of dyslexia is a strength because that's the way it is. And so this, you know, in this ancient book of ours, the Mislabeled Child, my husband, he came up with this idea of the telescope, where it's like, you have to know which end of the telescope that you're looking in. Some cases it can put things in sharp focus, and the other thing can be distorting. So from our point of view, there is this two-sided nature, and
Mhm.
that is not that's not a provable thing, but these associations that come together, and the more we've met so many people who are dyslexic of all different ages, the strengths and the challenges seem like they're two sides of a coin. They're related to each other. So that's our perspective. Why concentrate on strengths? Because it's all about strengths. And sometimes the challenges that present, I think it's funny, like there was a thing that I coined about Einstein's folly, because early on, I guess he was working in the patent office. He saw a lot of blueprints and did all this kind of spatial visual stuff. And later on in life, then he got all these breakthroughs because of the theory of relativity. But he was a relatively young man, and the rest of his life, he was intimidated by people saying that he wasn't able to prove all these kind of simulations and things like that. So he spent the later part of his life all focused on algebraic, proofs of things that no one ever thought was not a breakthrough. So it was Einstein's folly. Rather than concentrating on his strengths, he was focused on his weaknesses, and then he never had any breakthrough. So, I mean, I do think that there's a quality about that can be true, because, if you're someone who really wants excellence, you can focus so much on the weakness that you really don't ever take time to nurture the strengths. And so not saying that it's all or none like that, but it's just good to keep at the back of your mind because so much time gets spent with remediation and things like that. And if you don't have that joy and you can't find something that you're good at, and the strengths that are present in children seem to be different than the strengths that are, present when you're fully mature, as you might guess, right? Sometimes kids will just say their main strengths, it's, like sports or things like that, and that is totally great, having something that they can actually persevere at, to look at the rewards of hard work and things like that. And some tasks that come easily is a great thing. And that may turn into an adult gift or it may just be like another thing that's part of them when they're an adult. That's fine.
Well, and I think for young kids, because school is, 7 to 8 hours a day, and you're supposed to be doing a lot of reading and writing during that time, it's very easy for them to focus on the things that aren't going well because it's just like a flood the whole day long for them. And we know that they don't have every strength in every dyslexic, but we know that they can be musically talented or in sports or in art or in performing or three-dimensional thinking or 3D building. And if you're able to focus on or explore what your child's strengths are, you're giving them an identity of someone who is successful and has something to offer the world, not as I'm such a terrible student. Because these kids, they are the movers and the shakers of the world. They have that capability, and we want to make sure that we're supporting them so that they can go off and do whatever it is they have in store for us. And I think that parents too, it can be so frustrating when your child is not reading well and or cannot write very well. Um, that it might seem like, well, I need to focus on this because this is really important. It is important, but they also have to feel like the things that they're good at have value, and especially in a parent's eyes when they're in elementary school, because you are their mirror. You're telling them if they have value or worth.
And really, for a lot of dyslexic students that I've worked with, they're so, and again, not everyone's different, but they're so strong at those higher level thinking skills, like
Yep.
inferencing, getting the gist of things. And conversely, there's so many kids out there who appear to be good readers because they can decode everything, but they have no conception of what they've just read. But to the kids, it looks like they're strong readers, even though you as the adult can see, oh, they didn't understand anything. So it's really all about how you frame things. Everything, I think Fernette was saying, like, really, there's two sides. Like, it can be a weakness and a strength. And why focus on the weakness when you can focus on the strength? Like, it just, it leads to, I have found anyway, more successful outcomes.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd also add, in our book, we also talk about, and it's also in our movie, talk about the mind strengths in particular. It's certainly not limited to the mind strengths, and it doesn't mean that non-dyslexics don't have them at all. But these were based on a lot of survey data where there were sharp trends, and sometimes 80-20, for instance. But MIND is an acronym standing for material reasoning, interconnected reasoning, narrative reasoning, and then dynamic reasoning. So there are different clusters that you may not even guess at. I think there are also pieces of evidence, for instance, if you're able to get that comprehensive testing to see what, often verbal abilities, verbal reasoning is quite strong in twice exceptional kids and things like that. And if you look, all that kind of stuff you would think you want to have, if you could design your brain, all the higher order thinking things are really quite strong in gifted dyslexics, twice exceptional dyslexics. And so, those things, you just means that you've got to support the early years, give it time, and then, it comes more closely together. And so it's that extreme, strengths and then frustrating kind of like clerical skills, as like Tom West talks about, the clerk skills, being able to transcribe things or whatever, that are so frustrating. And so just understanding this is a very strange kind of profile because the intelligence in some regards seems quite high. You might pick it up before they go to school. They seem to have wonderful insights about things. And then suddenly there's this kind of shock when they don't seem to be, performing as well in these kind of classroom tasks.
Yeah, that makes me think about math for dyslexics who are not dyscalculic. They can grasp math pretty quickly. Like, but if you ask them to write down the details, it makes me think of Einstein. It's like, oh, show my work. Like, if they try to show their work for some of these kids, they're going to get the wrong answer by the time they finish showing their work, even though they were able to pretty quickly come to the right answer. So there's lots of interesting strengths to be aware of and for parents to kind of celebrate too. Um, because these kids, I think they don't get celebrated enough.
Agree.
So I
Yeah.
would like to move us to, there's a bunch of questions coming in, and these are tied to sort of ones we had talked about as well. And that is, what do you do with your school? What do we ask for at school? How do you talk to teachers who don't understand self-dyslexia? Someone saying they have a profoundly gifted child who's compensating so hard, they're still high achieving. So the teachers, right, don't believe you. And someone else asked, what are some strength-based assessment tools? What are tools like models, templates, and guides that teachers can use? So what should we be talking to schools about?
Well, there's a free mind strength screener at NeuroLearning, so you could definitely take that. And then I'm co-founder of NeuroLearning, but Brock has really been throwing himself into this. He's created this really cool, he just sort of quietly launched it in the past week, but he created this really cool that ties together the strengths and then applies it in different types of curricula and mnemonics and stuff like that. And it's a thriving dyslexic minds community. So that's my little plug for that because it is very neat what he does. He sees like the like people take it doesn't matter what age. I think it's like 7 to 70. You take the screener and then it applies it specifically to questions that you may have about particular challenges. It can go into detail like I cannot remember the presidents or, things like that, or how do I spell these homonyms? It does that, but it also tries to use what your strengths are for learning strategies, as well as having this like video library with like hundreds of videos and stuff like that. So I do think that that's really helpful. At the very least, though, there is a free mind strength screener that you can take there and you just get emailed your results.
I think it can be hard because most classroom teachers are not going to understand the complexity of a twice exceptional dyslexic student. Public school can be really hard because teachers likely don't have any practical experience with meeting these kids' needs. And so I think as parents, you need to beyond advocating, you need to take on some of it yourself. So if you know of a book that they're supposed to be reading, get the audiobook. Most kids that I know who are 2E dyslexic, they love audiobooks, and it is one way for them to access for their own maturity and intellectual level. They can access so much that they would read if they could read, but because they don't read well, that's not a good avenue for them. So you want to make sure that you are helping your child keep up and excel in things that the classroom teacher is not going to be able to meet them at.
And I would say with schools, with that question, like what do we do with the school? I would start off assuming that you're a team, but also make sure you ask for things in writing and know your rights. So kind of that go forth with the best foot forward. There we go. But also protect yourself and document things and just definitely know your rights and keep on advocating. The squeaky wheel gets the grease is so true. And even if you do go to your teacher, your child's teacher, and say, hey, I need this, the teacher can advocate, but it ultimately comes down to the administration. And there's only so much the teacher can do. So that's where knowing your rights as a parent is really important. Go on your school district's website and also making sure you request things in writing.
Yeah, and I
My
would say
experience, oh, go ahead.
sorry, the NeuroLearning also, so two things too. NeuroLearning also has it's a screener, but it also has a pretty affordable because now comprehensive testing is going to be thousands of dollars. That's the way it is. Usually it's not covered by insurance. Sometimes it is, with occasional companies and things like that, like Microsoft. But I think the neurolearning screener is about $80, and it has a component to try to identify stealth dyslexics in terms of looking at the gap between vocabulary. And it creates like about a 15-page report. And so that has been given to over 8,000 people now. And it is being used at Stanford. And it's qualified. We know an ENT physician who could not repass her boards without extended time. And she took that little test and they gave her extended time. That doesn't mean that always happens. I would say it's much more common for people to get 504s with that little screener. And it doesn't mean that you get it, right? It depends what scores you actually have. So I don't want to miscommunicate it, that you take this little test and suddenly things happen. But if you actually have a profile which is consistent with dyslexia and can account for some of the difficulties you're having in standardized tests, it has been one kind of way of proving things for certain schools. No guarantees, but a lot of 504s and some IEPs that have come through that route. So that's kind of a really cool thing. And there is a component also, like I said, I love this kind of designed thing that takes some of these scores and also helps guide you on writing letters for particular purposes, because it's tough. There's terminology and things like that. So the neurolearning, this new, he and I have been training this AI. So it's not just scooping everything up off the web, but from all of our presentations, all of our papers and everything like that. And we've trained that part. And so that there's a little writer in there to help parents, identify and be able to kind of present that, because an IEP meeting is like incredibly intimidating. And for instance, if you work with a tutor or something, you should definitely have them there. I mean, it's really intimidating in person, but it can help you begin to put into words what you're hoping to get for your kids. Oh, I almost forgot to, that screener will qualify for Bookshare. So that's also free
Great.
electronic books. If you qualify as having like I think it's high probability dyslexia. They have criteria for it on the screener, but I think it's one of the few screeners that will qualify that, because, that's exactly true that a lot of those kids, when in the movie, you're thinking, I don't know that they're providing accommodations at all. I don't know that if some of those kids aren't getting, the reading assignments in audio, they're not getting the content. So just really basic things like that. You need to know your rights, but also I think there's having more data on your side helps you present it. And this is the hope of our movie. So our movie is the Dyslexic Advantage, and it's supposed to be coming out in early October. We're waiting for the donor to find out when he wants to have the global premiere. So I can't say it, but we might start leaking it beforehand. But the individual streaming, it's $4. Gift it to your teacher, and have them read it, because I mean, you can argue that all of them, they're clearly talking about, their lives as adults and their strengths. But there's one in there who didn't get identified as being dyslexic until he was in medical school.
So guys, it's 8:30 and I want to just be respectful of your time. I'm going to close out with one question. And I think I'll start with Mandy because it's about high school. Can you speak to supporting TUI dyslexic kids in high school? It seems that most of the support is geared toward younger kids, yet the older kids struggle with the amount of reading and taking notes and things like that. Can you
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so definitely use the tools that are out there. I think I saw someone say that Bookshare was too robotic. There are other services out there, like you could still get those ebooks, but use Speechify, which a lot of people tend, or at least in my experience, tend to like more. There are different, just so many tools that you can access and use for your kid. And also executive functioning skills, like breaking things into steps, breaking the reading into chunks that they have to do, breaking the writing into chunks. And with high schoolers, especially, working on their self-advocacy is so huge because it's hard, but this is the perfect time to practice. Like if a teacher gives some assignment that doesn't meet with their accommodations, help them draft an email. Just to clarify, given my accommodation, whatever it is, if talking in person is too hard. So I would say self-advocacy is just so huge and maybe not necessarily what people immediately think with high schoolers. And that also goes along with being okay with using their accommodations in their lives, because a lot of high schoolers are like, no, like, I don't need it, it's not cool. And so it's really like, when I have high schoolers, I'm like, I wear glasses. Are you going to tell me that it's reasonable for me to try and read from far away when I am blind without my glasses? Is that reasonable? And they're like, well, no, of course not. And I'm like, same thing, your accommodations, extra time on tests, like recorded, like access to slides ahead of time, whatever the accommodations are, they are like that is your right, so that you can have an equitable experience in education. I feel like there's more that I didn't say, but I'm like trying to speak quickly with the time.
You're always welcome to write a blog post for us with more information. I want to thank you guys so much. This was an absolutely amazing conversation. And I hope we continue it, especially when we screen your movie, Fernette. And if any of you want to get in touch with anyone here, please let us know. We're happy to put you in touch. And thank you all so much. It was lovely to speak with you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great to get together.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, great to see you.
Should we stop the recording?